Hi everybody, my name is Iain Elliott. I'm the General Manager of Atturra Enterprise Content Management Business Unit, and today I'm joined by Greg Clarke from OpenText Cybersecurity. We're going to have a chat about how data is underutilized within organizations and how companies can drive greater value and insights from the information that they have. Greg, nice to see you.
Thanks, Ian. I'm really glad to be back in Australia. It's nice to be here and spend some more time with you.
So it must have been a long travel in from Canada this morning, I imagine.
30 hours, I think, door to door. It was a long trip. Yeah.
Hopefully the jet lag's not too bad.
It's not too bad. You got me at a good time.
Excellent. For those of you that don't know us, Atturra has been operating with OpenText as a partner for the last 4 years. We're a digital advisory and managed services provider supporting customers across Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. So today we're going to talk about data and how it's being used within organizations, how they can maximize the ROI from the information that they already have. This topic should be of interest to anybody who's in that CIO, CEO sort of level of role, looking at the way that you're maximizing your investments and the way that you can manage the costs that are associated with managing information within your business. To kick things off, Greg, maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of the successes that you've seen.
Well, I think a lot of our customers are starting in, let's call it data minimization, right? So a lot of the data estates that customers have these days are very large. Mm-hmm. So you can't eat the elephant in one big gulp, right? So you need to be able to build out your projects in a way where you can look at minimizing, creating a smaller haystack. The best way to do that is looking at redundant, out of date, and trivial data. A good example, local example, Queensland Museum. Yep. We were able to help them save over $60,000 a year just in storage by creating a smaller haystack for them. So 11% of their data was duplicate. 38%, 39% was out of date, trivial, and those are where projects can really get started because those show an internal rate of return on the first phase of a project. So it really helps fund the project, helps get the project some momentum behind it. And then we see customers diving in a little bit deeper, looking for sensitive data, PII, especially looking for privacy compliance, right? Really being able to understand your information a lot deeper.
Interesting. So, that's something that we hear a lot about today is that data is so important to us and nobody wants to let go of it. And, there's this growing expanse of data. We hear about terabytes a year being stored. And then I also hear people talking about this concept of the Databerg. You talked about a little bit about the amount of savings that you were able to get from Queensland Museum. Yep. They're a prime example of that phenomenon. Could you tell us a little bit about what the Databerg is and what does that mean to people?
So think of it as what's above the surface of the water is what's known to you, right? And what's below is significant, it's dark, it's unknown, it's the unknown unknowns. Right, of data. Anytime you have users managing information, they're going to tuck it away somewhere. It's not going to go into the right file plan. It's not going to go, every time, right? Yeah. So data sprawls, application sprawls all over the enterprise. Mm. So when we talk about a Databerg, there is a small portion of the business data that is known to the organization, that is well managed. But there are test applications, there are file shares, there's SharePoint, there's things like Dropbox and OneDrive. Data is just everywhere. So the things that are below the surface are where risk resides. And if you don't know where your sensitive data is, it can be easily exposed to the wrong people. It can be used for the wrong purposes, right? And it could be, intended or unintended consequences of data being exposed.
Yeah, right. And I suppose, when you look at the iceberg, you've got that 20% above the waterline, which is really your operational data, the things that are mattering to you. The rest is a certain degree of paranoia in companies, things that are being kept because they don't know whether they should get rid of it or whether they should keep it. They're kind of in this purgatory of going, well, I'll just hold on to it just in case.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, that becomes a really dangerous artifact in a business, I guess.
Especially with privacy, right? So you need to be in a position to, whether it's GDPR or other global privacy regulations or the ones you have here in Australia and in New Zealand, you really have an obligation to keep that data that your business runs on. Yep. And if you do not have a business purpose for keeping information, the privacy regulations say you need to start aggressively doing something with that data. You need to start managing the retention and disposition around that data. You need to think about deleting it. So the days of over retention are past. You're putting yourself at risk. You're putting your customers' data at risk, and you're putting your reputation at risk. And that's where we see, in a lot of cases, is the compelling thing behind privacy regulations. It's the corporate reputation. It's your stakeholders, your shareholder value. Yep. That is at risk when you end up on the front page of whatever .com, au.au you get your news from.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
And that's a huge risk to organizations.
And I guess looking just beyond the risk and the, I guess the life cycle management is what we're describing there. It's the costs as well, right? The cost of storage is not getting any cheaper, no matter what people tell us.
No, absolutely. And I think that when you look at over retention, using that term again, it is, whether it's cloud storage, whether it's file shares, it's a cost center for the business, right? And over retention ultimately costs the business money. The programs that we describe for Queensland Museum are ones we've done hundreds of times with other customers. It's about reducing the storage footprint. It's about reducing costs. It's about reducing data center costs, air conditioning costs, energy costs around managing that information. The actual FTEs or the people that are there to run that application or manage that data can be reduced by creating a best practice around what data do we have, what's the business purpose around that data, and are we keeping the data that runs the operations and minimizing the rest, so we can again run more efficiently, run at a better cost of operations, and in a lot of cases, businesses want to be more sustainable, right? So it's creating a smaller carbon footprint. It's supporting a lot of sustainability requirements.
Yeah, so it's good for them and it's good for all of us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Ian. So let's start with some products, right?
Sure.
So the flagship products from OpenText solve a lot of the problems that we've talked about already, and we'll continue to talk about in this session. Our core data discovery and risk insights, so the ability to understand information, classify that information, and remediate the risk around it, really, really core. And we've seen that, especially in this market. We've done great inroads in the data discovery space. Our integration with Extended ECM, which has now been rebranded to OpenText Content Management, allows that retention and disposition of data. So when I talk about keeping the right information for the right amount of time to comply with privacy regulations and your records obligations, that's what really is the official records management system underneath to help organizations manage that information over time, over its life cycle. Okay. Now, I've talked a little bit about the product, but when you talk about what Atturra does with your customers, can you share with me a little bit about how you guys approach with those solutions in mind?
Yeah, absolutely.
How you approach those problems with customers?
Yeah, so often we go in and different industries, different sectors, same problem. We've got a whole bunch of information. We don't know what's important. We don't know what we need to hold on to. We also have situations where they're worried about what the content may be. There was a change in legislation last year which moves the responsibility to, or rather the impact to directors directly for any breaches. All right. So people want to know, is there PII information? Is there PHI information? How are we managing the sum of all the data that we have? So our first step is obviously to go into a discovery mode and to deploy something and in the OpenText product suite, as you mentioned, that's the core data discovery and risk insights. That we can deploy and we can point it at a myriad of different endpoints, whether you've got SharePoint, whether you've got a file store, we can pull that information in And then using the templates, we're able to identify different types of PII information and help customers to get control and some governance around their data set, because that's ultimately the problem.
So you could do a risk assessment, you could do a POC, right? You could do a data cleanup, right? A data hygiene project. So there's a lot of different ways you can deploy those solutions, right? It depends on the maturity level of the customer or the actual project that they're looking to undertake.
Absolutely, and we'll talk about it later, but we have a POC that will help you to get started in exactly that situation, you know?
Absolutely.
You give us 0.5 terabyte of data and we'll tell you what you got in that data set. Nice. It really helps companies to understand what situation they're in, you know? And for a lot of companies, it's what do I do next, you know? Once I understand what I have as my data, what's the next step, and how am I going to curate that information? That's where extended ECM comes in. I'm still getting used to the name change, but
yeah, we all
it's coming. Yeah. The ability to take that discovery information, apply a taxonomy, put some structure around it, and then load it into a platform where we can actually control who is accessing the information, what systems can touch it, for what purposes. That gives companies a level of governance that they're severely lacking, and puts them on a runway which is going to ultimately lead to having a lot more control over their own data and the way it gets used. And it also ensures that they remain compliant too. Right. And that's such an important part. I mean, you know, we talked before about the changes in regulations. Breaches are becoming more and more common. And anything we can do that minimizes the footprint or the visibility of the data within an organization helps to reduce the risk of a breach.
And I always say when I'm talking to customers, when 10 years ago when we would talk about data protection, they would think, maybe 15 years ago, they would think backup.
Yeah.
Right? 5 or 6 years ago, they would think, oh, it's encryption. But when you look at how we can help customers protect their data, that is moving it into a managed repository so its life cycle of data can be managed, defensively deleting it at the source. It could be encrypting the PII that's inside of the documents, right? Those are different techniques, different ways to remediate risk. Yeah. So when we look at how we help differentiate in the market, it's really around how do we help customers remediate that risk. The ability to identify and build some nice dashboards, I mean, that's almost becoming a commodity, but the real value to customers is where, you know, the rubber hits the road. It's what do I do? How do I risk? How do I, improve my risk posture?
I think the key thing is to make it part of a daily workflow, you know, to make the solution becomes just the de facto way of working, and nobody really notices it. We talk a lot about the pipeline of data as it goes through a business. And it's not a point solution. People need to recognize that you can't just, and this is the old way of thinking about IT, is I'll spend X amount of money on it now and I don't have to worry about it for the next 5 years. Yeah. That's no longer true. Like, data's growing so quickly within organizations that you need to have a process that lives with the data and evolves with the data. So for us, it's really about helping companies understand the life cycle of the data, know from ingestion through to building a taxonomy, categorizing the information, putting it in a secure storage repository, and then being able to manage whether you retain it or you delete it, as you said. But even on top of that, from a compliance perspective, do we have an audit trail of what we did? Because that becomes so important further down the track. You know? Right.
And we're at this unprecedented growth of data. You and I have been in this business long enough to remember when 250 terabytes was a lot of data.
Yeah.
But with things like AI and large language models and Gen AI, these systems need data.
Totally.
Right. So these will only bring more risk.
Absolutely.
Right. So putting sensitive information, putting tons of training data into these large language models and vector databases will obviously create, a greater risk landscape for our organizations. They're having a hard enough time managing the data they have, the active data, that top of that Databerg,
absolutely,
and then the legacy data underneath, right? This is just creating a whole other dimension or paradigm that will cause organizations, to really reconsider how do they really look at risk and how do they manage that going forward.
I agree completely. I'm probably giving away my age a little bit, but I remember buying hard drives that were counted in megabytes.
Right.
So, I mean, now we're talking about terabytes and petabytes of information.
Absolutely.
And it's just growing exponentially. So, being able to curate that information and automate it as well. It can't just be somebody did something. It has to be that there's a policy in place. That's probably one of the biggest risks that we see in organizations today is that they're not policy driven. They're happy to have data driven decision making, but they don't have policies around their information management. How long are we holding on to this type of data? Where does it get stored? Who has access to it? What systems can connect to that information? And helping people to recognize what the demands of their business are, whether it's people, systems, process, that's a really valuable interaction for us with them.
Yeah, and I think that, going back to the 20% of data that runs the business, right, that's the easy part, right? Because there is an owner of that data. There is someone that you can point to. How long should we keep this?
Yep.
Right? Where the risk is inherent is in the other parts of the business, right? How do you determine how long you keep stuff that is in your file share or on my desktop? It really comes down. What we're seeing a lot lately is there isn't an uber owner of the data, and a lot of larger organizations, even mid-sized organizations, are trying to push that back down to the actual individual user to determine this is information that helps me do my job outside of that 20%, right? And I'm going to help make that business user, give them some deterministic means to say, oh, this is my information that I need to keep. The rest of it, we can delete or we can deprioritize that information going forward. But that's one shift I'm seeing in the market, certainly.
And I think, you talk about user data as opposed to the enterprise's data. I think that's an area where, using the M365 tools, we're able to pull information from the Office applications straight into Content Manager.
Right.
And then we have the controls and the policies and the mechanisms in place to ensure that information is being managed correctly. So moving down the process to the desktop almost, where you're now starting to give people, hey, here's the tools that you're using at a desktop level. It's not about what you pushed into SharePoint. It's not about what you published via a file store. It's everything from your desktop onwards.
So Iain, you were talking a little bit about policy. And I think the one thing that I've noticed over the years, and especially with privacy regulations coming on board, if you don't have a strong set of policies on what information you need to keep, how long you need to keep it for, that really leads to, and I used the term over-retention before, that runs up costs, it increases risk. If you don't have visibility into the value of your data, the importance of that information, and ensure that it's managed over its life cycle, you're putting, going back to reputation risk, you're putting your organization at risk, you're putting your customers' data at risk. I think it's one of the biggest things that we see that is impacting customers today is just the poor data management overall, I think. In some organizations, and I have to say, coming to Australia for the last 10 years, I haven't seen a region like this. The best practices that a lot of customers that we have here, their implementation of information governance is unmatched, compared to the other regions. But I'm telling you, from a global perspective, if you don't understand your data, if you don't have policies, you are creating a future nightmare scenario.
Certainly. We've had some high-profile breaches in recent years. And I think that's created a lot of awareness in organizations. And there certainly is an increase in maturity around that. There are still organizations, whether it's in legal holds or other reasons, but they're holding on to data just in case. And just in case very quickly translates to just in breach. If that information was held on just for a rainy day, but then suddenly it's in the public sector, it could well be information that never needed to be held onto in the first place. And it's really about making sure that people understand the types of data that they're collecting. Why do we need to hold this? What's the profile of it? Is it critical information? Going back to the iceberg metaphor before, like the 20% of operational data, that means that 80% of the information in your business is not making a difference in your day-to-day BAU business.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay? And now we know some of it needs to be retained for compliance, and we know some of it needs to be retained for legacy purposes. But it doesn't all need to be retained. The example from Queensland Museum is not alone. There's far more. But like almost half of their data was being retained for no reason.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it's really important just to remember the reasons why we keep the information and ensure that we're not holding on to it just in case for a rainy day.
Right.
There is no rainy day in data. That's when you're on the front page of the newspaper, like you said before.
Absolutely. So, Iain, we touched on AI, a few moments ago. I think that what's really interesting is, look, there's a lot of promises around AI. I think that large language models, we're going to be implementing LLMs inside of the products we've talked about earlier to improve the experience of our users, right? To help them get to the point where they can classify data better, where they can remediate risk faster, right? To really leverage to optimize it. But when you look at how organizations are implementing AI today, would you say that some are taking a real measured approach, and others are maybe it's kind of haphazard, or it is lacks a plan? How are you seeing AI get implemented with some of the customers you're talking to, or what you've seen in the market right now?
I think AI is such a buzzword, right? Like everybody's excited. If you want to launch a product, add AI on the end of it,
Yeah.
So, and it's really powerful. I agree. Like, the potential for it is amazing. And I get like really excited about seeing new ways of using it. Yeah. I think the biggest risk is companies haven't thought through what's going to happen with the data. So it's all our internal data. We'll put it on an internal LLM, and then we don't have to worry about it going up and training any of the commercial models. Okay, that kind of addresses it, but it still doesn't take away the fact that the guy on the front desk asks the LLM, what are the salaries of the entire organization? All right.
Yeah.
So you really have to make sure that you're putting the right data in, garbage in, garbage out, as the phrase goes. We want to make sure that it's not highly important information in, because it'll be highly important information coming out as well. So that critical curation, and I mention that word a lot because that's what we do. We're the gatekeepers to the information. We're ensuring that it gets to the right people. But AI changes that model. It suddenly has got all the information available to help make decisions, and people want to give it more than they probably should, which is another reason why we need to be structuring the data, taking that unstructured information, putting it into a structure that we can then expose to the LLM to say, okay, Greg's the person asking the question. What is he allowed to know? And therefore, what data set do I base my response on?
Right.
Those are the sort of things that we really need to be focused on, not just throwing all the information in. And I think a lot of it comes back to what is your policy. A lot of organizations don't even have an AI policy.
Right.
It's not even a consideration yet because it's so new. 12 months ago, have you heard about AI? Now, how often do you use it?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a big change. And I think, we see AI in the OpenText products, the Aviator stack. Titanium looks really promising, and
Absolutely.
Quite excited to be able to get there. But the first steps is really going through the CDDRI cycle of discovering information, categorizing it, putting it in a taxonomy, and then storing it in a structured format that we can then train our models from.
I think curation is the exact term that I use as well. It's about providing, and LLMs love PDFs, right? Gives structure to unstructured data, and rich in metadata. It's great for imagery and things like that, within the documents itself. But if we can mask the PII in that curated model, right, and push that into our aviators, right, it's a curated model that has desensitized information. So customer information, credit card information, anything that may have leaked inadvertently, that maybe the LLM itself, the prompts that you use, you can still use it, but the data inside is protected or de-identified. So I think that the curated model plays really, really nicely into that AI policy, that AI strategy, that any data going into an LLM should be previously de-identified. Once the problem is already in the vector database, then you have a much larger issue at hand.
Absolutely. It's a lot easier to, as you say, manage the data before it becomes distributed.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think the continuous adoption of AI, it's not going away. You know, the rate that information comes into a business, it means that you have to have a pipeline that is constantly assessing things, constantly applying structure to an unstructured data set. One of the areas where we see it happening quite a lot is, and in the current economic world, a lot of mergers, acquisitions, or even divestments where companies are splitting up. But the ability to take that information and either ingest it or export it to be able to move it to another organization, the faster that you can handle that information, the faster you can consume it and make it part of your operational day-to-day, that's really a game changer.
Absolutely. And what we've talked about, we haven't really said it out loud, is we're talking about outcomes from data discovery. Data discovery is a starting point for you to deliver business outcomes for your customers. That could be data minimization, right? Cost savings, data hygiene. It could be risk assessments. It could be data lifecycle management. It could be, an M&A divestiture. We've done, I don't know if you've followed my career, but from HP to Micro Focus to OpenText, we've had to split and be able to do something exactly what you described. When HP split into HP Inc. and HPE, we used our technology to separate the business. Right. What is related to the HPI business? What is related to the HPE business? We did exactly that. It was really interesting. Yeah.
No, I think it's a more pressing concern these days. It's how do I get the value out of an organization that I've acquired as quickly as possible? So we've talked a lot about data and how it's getting bigger all the time, and we want to make it smaller. But realistically, we have to accept that data's growing. Right? It's not a situation where we're saying you've got 10 terabytes, 50 terabytes, it's never going to get any bigger. We know it's going to get bigger, but we want to minimize how quickly it gets bigger and make sure as we move through the life cycle of data, we're disposing of the things that we shouldn't be retaining any longer. Hopefully our audience has understood that from today.
I hope so.
The next part of it is really making sure we got the right tools to be able to work with data. So OpenText product set is really designed to scale. And we're seeing that more and more. Like the data sets we're dealing with are these large data sets. We work in, as we call it, the top end of town, the major brands and organizations that people on the street know. And they're often in retail, or they might be in utilities or the mining sector, but they're common brand names and they're expansive organizations. So they've got large data sets to manage. How does OpenText deal with scale?
So I think from a scale standpoint, look, we can handle smaller projects, because look, in a lot of cases, customers, want to start with their file shares and they want to consolidate them down. Rarely will you come across a customer that wants to start with a petabyte of data. Right?
We wish.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the nice part about, one, it being a SaaS solution. You can start tomorrow.
Yep.
Right. You can deploy it immediately and start analyzing data, within a few hours. So you can start looking at the value of data right away. So you can start small and grow. Some of the things we talked about, return on investment and reducing the cost of data, you can start showing some internal rate of return on those projects right away to your customers, executives, and above. The other part is being able to, I use the analogy, you can't eat the elephant in one big gulp. In large data estates, you really need to be able to prioritize. And how do you prioritize? Well, we've got scanning technology that will essentially create a heat map across a very large data estate, and you can prioritize certain types of data, specific PII, risky data, or hotspots around intellectual property or around individual devices that are on the network. So you can prioritize how you deploy core data discovery and risk insights to remediate risk as fast as possible where risk resides at a greater density. So scale is one thing, yes, but you can start small. You can prioritize where you spend your money, where your most risky data is, so you can be more prescriptive in terms of how you, as a partner of ours, deploy core data discovery and risk insights to help customers solve their problems. Because in a lot of cases, it's not every customer is unique, but customers have different priorities at different times. So there's a lot of flexibility, so we can scale both horizontally, but also from a use case standpoint, provide a lot of flexibility in terms of solving those downstream outcomes that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, we see organizations that they're split by business unit, or their data is still this humongous blob of data, this Databerg, but then they've divided themselves into different business units, or they've got different functions, and often you'll see segregation based on those functions. So the ability to just take a piece and then run that through the system is really valuable. And I think also the fact that you don't have to start from scratch every time, you start running a scan, and then as it runs through, as more information comes available, you can just update the scan and start to process that information as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really powerful.
Ian, the one thing that we've seen, and especially working with your organization, expert hand at the wheel, working with customers to help guide them through these various different kinds of projects with these outcomes we've talked about today. It's really key for a partner like yourselves to be involved in these projects. They really can help organizations deliver value faster, and again, help remediate risk as quickly as possible.
Yeah, very true. I think the fact that our team is made up of people that have been living the problem, a lot of the consultants that we have within our organization have been records managers or information managers within organizations, and they've seen the problems firsthand. They've had the responsibility for solving these issues in the past, and they've got the scars from the battles, Yeah. So now we want to go out and win the war. Now we want to go and say, hey, everybody else, benefit from our experience, benefit from the things that we've done and the various different customers across all sorts of different sectors that we've been able to assist, because problems can be quite common. Yes, we're all doing different things, but the challenges that we're trying to take on are quite common. The legislation covers different sectors, but it is the same legislation.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that we've done, and you'll be pleased to hear this, is we've put together a proof of concept offering that we can run through with any clients or companies that want to talk to us, where we'll take their information. They choose what information. It can be the most chaotic, unstructured data that they have. We will run it through the system, and we'll give them 30 days to view the reports and to see the outcomes from doing a scan and doing that analysis that we've talked about. All the steps that would lead you up to the point of saying, okay, now what should I do with the data?
Okay.
So we're doing the initial curation. We're doing the what's the taxonomy going to look like? What's the classifications? Is there any PII here? What are the elements that are going to get me into trouble? And then we're going to highlight that back to them and say, now you can see what we can do.
Okay. So how much data, how long?
So the data is half a terabyte, so 500 gigabytes of data. We want to make it something manageable.
Sure.
Okay. And then we'll give them access to the platform for 30 days where they can see the dashboards, they can see the reports, they can extract that information. So it's there for them to work with. And then we can start to work on a business case.
And you've got your individual contributors at Atturra that we talked about, boots on the ground, the people that have seen and lived these problems in the past to guide them through those reports as they
100%.
Yeah.
So we're there to help them get up and running. It's a hands-off experience for them. Just give us your messy data, and then we'll take it from here.
All right, good. And easy to take that to a paid customer. So you take that and easily leverage it for another phase of if they want to continue on.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Great.
So we can build on that. If they go, this is something that we want to keep.
Yeah.
Okay, let's build on it. Let's expand the scope and
let's do it.
Go from here.
All right.
Well, thanks very much, Greg. It's been great to
No,
talk
it's
to you.
been a pleasure. Yeah, thanks very much.
And hopefully our listeners or viewers will have got something from today, and we look forward to talking to them.
All right. Yeah, me too. Thanks very much.
Thank you.